Blog Talk Radio.
Here we go with the main event of the evening. Ladies and gentlemen in attendance, moms and dads joining us around the world. It's time for the bout you've all been waiting for. Finally, it is showtime.
Here, man, we dedicate our life to this sport. We do thousands of sit-ups in camp. We run hundreds of miles, for the ones that take it serious. And we just dedicate ourselves fully to our craft, man. We watch tape. We have attitude. We rooting, and we go into that fight just to land on the line.
Minnesota basketball fans, this is the first episode of the Living in Loserville, Minnesota basketball. Basketball? I just said basketball. Let's start that over. This is the first episode of the Living in Loserville podcast, Minnesota basketball plethora of facts and ideas and talk. And what a great way to start out the first episode. Well, I don't know, for those who like Thibs or love Thibs, I don't know too many out there. But what a crazy way to start the podcast with, the firing of Thibs, Coach Thibodeau. Obviously, just to give you a little information, a little background on this podcast, we will be doing it weekly here from January. Well, hopefully, into April and May with the Timberwolves, but we'll see. Hopefully the Gophers get there too. But it is a Minnesota basketball themed podcast. Okay? Now, does that mean high school? No, it doesn't. Will we talk a high school game from time to time or a high school player, like a highly recruited guy? Sure, of course. But it's going to center around and focus on the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Minnesota Gophers basketball programs, okay? So that's what we're dealing with. And obviously, like I said, Thibs being fired, kind of an interesting way to start off the first episode of the Living in Loserville podcast. Kind of crazy how that worked, but we will be, talking, recap, reviewing recent games and themes and trends that have taken place. We'll preview some games coming up, whether it's, Timberwolves or Gophers. Obviously, Thibs being fired. We've won a couple of games here. Still not that great on the road, although the Timberwolves has managed to finally get some road wins. Covington out for a month. We'll discuss how that will affect. On the Gopher side of things, got a huge W. Big victory on the road, mind you, in Wisconsin. Curry is back. Coffee is a bad man. And we'll also look ahead till tomorrow's night game against Maryland. 2-1 in the Big Ten right now. Unfortunately, as far as the AP poll goes, we did not get in the top 25. In the long run, it obviously doesn't matter right now. And in the in the short term, it may help. We're going through a stretch of games that are winnable before our schedule gets really, really tough. Got to play Michigan twice, who, by the way, if you haven't seen their recent rankings, they're number 2 in the country and looking damn good. But sometimes that goes to the players' heads. They haven't been ranked in a little while, and all of a sudden, hey, we're ranked. No, you still got to show up. So who knows? So anyway, like I said, it'll be here on a weekly basis, talking Timberwolves, talking Gophers hoops. And like I said, we'll go all the way to the NCAA tournament, as well as hopefully the NBA playoffs. And here we stand 2 games out of the playoffs. When I say here we, I mean Timberwolves. if this is your first, well, it's got to be your first time listening to the Living in Loserville podcast. Now that I think about it, I'm just kind of do some robotic stuff here once in a while, talking about this stuff. But anyway, it's available right here on blogtalkradio.com/rope-a-dope radio. It streams live and it archives. Okay, this is basically the home for it, but we're also part of the Grueling Truth Sports Podcast Network. That can be found everywhere as well. If you want to subscribe, you can check it out right at the blogtalkradio.com, Rope-a-dope radio, or you can go to iTunes, Player FM, Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, a whole lot of different places. That includes the Grueling Truth Sports Podcast Network. It also includes the iHeartRadio. They're on iHeartRadio and Spotify as well, is the Grueling Truth Sports Podcast Network. So you got basketball, you got football, you got baseball, you got boxing. Head on over to thegruelingtruth.net. That's thegruelingtruth.net. They got a great sponsor over there, mybookie.ag. I'm going to go ahead and bring in my co-host, Aaron. If you've heard this combo before, it's because we were just doing the Purple People Eaters podcast. What's going on, Aaron? How you doing, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing great, man. It seems like the timing's pretty good to be kicking off the Living in Loserville podcast. A lot of big news happening in the basketball world. So we've got Glenn Taylor decided he was going to make the decision and get rid of Thibs, and so it's a new start for the team and a new start for us here with the new show, and the Gophers are getting ready to crank up here in the Big Ten, so it couldn't be better timing to kick off the new podcast.
Definitely, and we'd like to thank those joining us via phone, just kind of listening. If you want to press 1 and join in, you can do that anytime. A lot of people just kind of hang out and listen. You can take the show on the go, 646-381-4990 for those listening, in the browser and about to go pick up the kids from practice, about to go to the grocery store, about to run errands, whatever you're going to do. You got to go to the gym, get a workout in before the national championship game. Take the show with you, 646-381-4990. And you're right. I mean, we basically have to start at the top, and that's where it started, basically at the top with the Timberwolves. And whether it's blame, a big share of the blame for, with Thibs, being that he was president and, in control of operations. Sure, we got a GM who's still there, by the way, and, a CEO and whatnot. But Thibs, was calling the shots beyond the owner overall, which is usually the case, especially with Taylor. And who knows what is exactly behind this stuff. But we're going to start with the Thibs stuff. And obviously Thibodeau, offensively speaking, it did look as if the game had passed him. Even Sam Mitchell and some other coaches, Flip as well, having a chance to work with these young players before. We did seem to get a lot out of, especially Wiggins. But with the offensive sets, the ball flow, just what you're trying to do in the modern NBA seemed to fit better a couple of years ago before Thibs got here. I think that's pretty clear. The way Thibs plays his starters, he didn't really trust them. The bench last year, I should say. This year, there was more trust. There has been a little bit more playing time, for the bench and rest. And, the minutes have gone down a little bit. Of course, there's always how many minutes did you play, Rose? Come on, dude. Really, Rose? So the minutes, the style, whatever you want to say, a lot of negativity from Thibs, especially this season. We started, hearing about it last season. And obviously when you announce his name at home games, you're getting a lot of boos. And during the game, you have signs, don't get me wrong. You don't want to just, cave into public pressure. But it's not like we're a top 4 West team like we were last year at this time. You know what I mean? So the timing on it threw me for a loop. To me, it doesn't totally add up unless you just look at it from a business perspective. And that's what a lot of people so far have been kind of focusing in on. and for good reason because, as we know, the season ticket renewal is coming out here in a little bit. And, slipping from 21st to 27th or 28th or something like that this year, we started to sell it out. We started to see the gains last year, but those, fell away. They slipped away. Attendance have been dropping. And like I said, there's a lot of negativity around the franchise right now. It started with, but this has been a crazy season, man. The Butler stuff, which had a lot to do with Thibs because he didn't really let everybody know, including those who should have known maybe, that, after the season, Butler already had requested a trade. And maybe we could have moved him in the draft like we acquired him in the draft. Maybe we could have, since we had him under contract, had to sign an extension, trade during free agency. It just would have been nicer to come in the camp without this lingering thing and saying, oh, we got to trade him. That sucked. But, of course, Thibs had some blame there, no doubt about it. Really, what's your take on this? We both were surprised by the timing. Business-wise, sure. People know the Saunders name, of course, with Flips, Ryan Saunders, who takes over now as the interim coach. He's been here for a while. Obviously, we know Flip. You get some good mojo. It's really just about next year. I think they could make some potential moves that could increase that. And I understand that. The writing was on the wall. It's not like either of us are surprised that Thibs is going to get fired at some point. It was just kind of strange because they played that 8-3 stretch, after we trade Butler. Then, the road was still killing them, but they've been kind of up and down, no doubt about it, inconsistent, like I said, on the road, but it just seems kind of weird, and I really hope it has to do with, we're halfway through the season. It's not getting any better. We're going to move on anyway. Screw it. Let's think about the ticket stuff. But if it's really just about getting Fred Hoiberg, and supposedly Taylor's a little nervous that Fred Hoiberg, either for coaching, which it sounds like he wants to stay in coaching, not be an executive, not being made the president, and in charge of player personnel, it really kind of is troublesome to me if they made this move just to get or have a great chance at getting Fred Hoiberg. What are your thoughts at the timing? What are your thoughts in general? And I know you're a little wishy-washy with Fred Hoiberg, as am I. I like him as a college coach. I'm just not sold on him as a professional.
Yeah, well, the timing was a little bit of a surprise. We thought that perhaps it would go on to the end of the season. But now, with a day to look at it, I think it kind of goes back to a lot of the things that you already pointed out with the business aspect and the season ticket renewal coming up here, and people probably not being as willing to renew their tickets under Thibs as some sort of protest or just, being fed up. I feel like there's also a few other issues that might have gone into it. Of course, it's speculation. It's only a day out, so we have no real information except for just a lot of accumulating speculation. And the trades, I thought maybe Glenn Taylor didn't like those so much, particularly the Rubio trade. He thought that he really liked Ricky Rubio and knew that he was part of Flip's overall plan, and didn't like to see that was sort of the first stone that got unturned with the demise of Thibodeau. I also thought they wanted to maybe make personnel decisions and have Thibodeau out of it as far as trades. I know that people say that Teague's on the block. And so I feel like it had to do with not only this year and possibly making a playoff push, but also personnel issues coming up with trades and, of course, the draft at the end of the season. So I thought that probably, I speculate, has something to do with it. I thought that my opinion of Thibs started off really well. I thought he was a good decision to bring in here as a coach. And it just began, I think, a little bit like Taylor, I presume, just sort of fell away, probably quarterly, 3 months at a time. First, I wasn't happy with the trade of Rubio. I thought that was where I first started to go, this is not kind of the direction that I see things going. I was a big fan of Rubio and still am. And then you follow that up with this Butler trade fiasco, and in that you dismantle what was Flip Saunders' plan going forward with Dunn and Levine. Dunn I could live with or without, but the Levine thing, that's what kind of stuck to me as not the greatest decision. And then, of course, you give up a player that pick that turned out to be Lauri Markkanen would fit in really well on this team. And then going into this season, I'm not happy and wasn't happy with the way he was using Josh Okogie as a spark. He should have at least been an everyday six-man. I thought that he brings a lot of energy, and if you're going to move a guard, which I think you probably are going to, then you need to get him time and experience. And overall, I think that in the Thibs experience, I was expecting a little better defense. Now, you can put that on the players. I'm sure that Thibs was emphasizing that daily. But if the players can't bring that on board and you can't see it executed on the floor, then it's back to if a tree falls in the forest, and no one's there to hear it, did it really make a sound? And so I didn't see the defense improving at all. Let me say it was a marginal improvement in defense. They showed some effort, but not the kind of effort that would make it a difference. I thought Butler, maybe that was the one thing that he brought to the team that might have lingered was teaching them that the necessity of playing defense. It's going to be interesting going forward. Saunders, I don't think if for the rest of the season at least he's the head coach. And, I don't know if he has the extensive playbook that Flip had, because Flip had a heck of a playbook, an encyclopedia,
Sure.
But so I don't think you can really compare the father Saunders to the son Saunders, just like you can't compare the father Pitino to the son Pitino. But I guess without having seen a game yet under Ryan Saunders, I feel like you're going to see a slow progression into what he wants to do as far as offensive basketball, and hopefully he can make an emphasis on defense.
Yeah, I hear you. We could sit there and break down stats from last year on the starters, defense compared to the bench, I think. But then again, bench is what Thibodeau made it. So that's on him. I do think, the stats bear it out that we are a better defensive team in the starting five, but as an overall team, we made strides, but you're right, we never got really all the way over the hump, and sure, Cat and Wiggins bear some of that responsibility. There's no doubt about it. But no matter what, it is what it is. It really is. It's on you. And we were in the 20s. Now, this year, I think we've pushed as high as 17 overall. But it's still, it's not that. I think a lot of people have caught up to what he really, when people call him a defensive guru, the game changing and people catching up to his style, his schemes, not just offensively, but defensively, I think is a fair point as well. We've since, this year we actually did get it. I think we got up to like the defensive rating 18th. Maybe it was 17th. I can't remember. But in that 9-3 stretch. But, it also, we're kind of up and down with them. And you're right. We didn't have that sound defense. We talked about this at the end of shows of our football show. We just have a little segment in there just as a teaser, basically, to let people know that this podcast was coming. But some of the things we mentioned, were things that were, Covington is a different fit, personality-wise, and the fact that Covington can come in and shoot threes, cut to the basket, and not have to do a whole lot offensively and really focus on D, whereas Butler, you can't necessarily do that as much because, it does wear you out. So he's a great defensive player, but when your sole purpose almost is a D and 3, the 3 and D guy, that really does leave you open to go chase and be a maniac on that side. So my point, with Thibodeau, the long-winded point I'm trying to get to, we talked about how maybe the double negative, the double dick personality, the asshole type, nah, dude, do it this way or no way, with Thibs, the barking, the screaming, and Butler. Obviously, that didn't play well with Cat and Wiggins, and obviously, sometimes you gotta be tough to players too. Just because it didn't work for you, well, that's what we need and expect out of you. But there is a way to say it. It's not always what you say; it's how you say it. And for whatever reason, as a team, we weren't consistent on defense. Now, a lot of it did have to do with Cat and Wiggins defensively, but overall, it wasn't like this huge thing. But as far as huge impact, like you said, I totally agree with you with that. But I do think it's still, I really do. As far as just kind of wrapping up this Thibodeau thing, as far as him getting fired and what he brought or what he didn't bring or whatever, I still think that theme that we've talked about as making the playoffs, seeing that place sold out during the regular season, having the third spot looking like we were going to get that third spot, and then Butler going down the stretch last year, playing just under 500 ball. Just certain things, knowing they now know what it takes to get the playoffs. They now know what it takes on a nightly basis. And I still think, and we also mentioned the roster. If you look 2 years before, and you're right about the Zach thing and the Flip thing. I'm more with you on the Rubio thing than the Zach, though, because I feel like we had 3 years of Zach. He was averaging 19, 20 points, and we weren't improving wins-wise. And I don't know if he improves you. Well, he doesn't improve you defensively. That's what we know. A lot of people were looking at his first 20 games this year and saying, oh, my God, why didn't we keep him? But you got to remember, there was like 3 main guys hurt. He was the only one shooting. If you look at his shots now, the attempts, if you give 21 or 22 attempts to a lot of players, they're going to go off. So I'm not so worried about Zach just because of the contract we'd have to give him at that time. But as far as the backup guard, I believe Thibs drafted him. I don't think Flip drafted him. I could be wrong. I think Thibs drafted him, though, and had him for 1 year. So I don't think that's a Flip thing. But you're right about the bad mojo in there, the Zach, and I think especially Rubio. I'm back and forth with Rubio as well, though, because now you look at him this season, and he's kind of fallen back into his old ways, and at times in the playoffs he'd be good and then bad. And I don't know. That whole getting in the playoffs and him not hitting an outside shot is still on the table if you look at his three-point percentage. I don't know. I would have liked to got more for him. That's for damn sure. But I'm not. I think we gave him a try though too. You know what I mean? We definitely let him try to improve on stuff that he needed to work on, and those two glaring thing was the outside shooting, which he did. We got to give him credit. He did get better at. But driving to the rack and finishing, he just has never been able to do that. Not that he can't drive to the rack, but it's the finish going away from contact rather than going to contact. But I think overall, roster-wise, I think we're better than we were as far as fit for the team. Because remember, Zach getting 12 shots or 14 shots is not Zach getting 20 and 21, which is what he was getting early in the season. So I don't know if we need more offense, or I know we don't need more offense. So the Zach thing, the contract, now if you were saying, well, if we were going to trade Wiggins at that time and keep Zach and give him the money, well, that's different, but that's not, unfortunately, that wasn't our scenario, judging it by per se, because he was already gone for Butler. But to give, you got to get. And I still think it was worth the risk because of First of all, free agency, we know how hard it is to get free agents here. So that's really pretty much the only way we were going to get a star player is give to get. You got to give to get. So I don't know. I still think this experience helped. I really did, even with Butler here and some of the things, the negative things he does impact-wise, well, negative and positive as far as showing. You know, he showed us how to play. He didn't necessarily lead us verbally the right way all the time. You got to have positives with your negatives as well. And I just think that they now know what it takes a lot more than they did because they actually went through it. And they sure are growing up with the NBA world, aren't they, in professional sports this year? Because you had the frickin' Jimmy thing. You had Jimmy waving a towel at Golden State, going with the crowd. Like, so you had the practice. You had the actual trade. Now you got a mid-season firing. You got everything in between happening. And I'll tell you what, ever since Butler's been gone, and even this season in general, before Butler was traded, Cat has found a new energy on defense, and he knows that it's his team now. And the defense that I'm seeing on a more regular basis has been impressive, very impressive to me. We're seeing blocks now, Aaron, and that's something we see him chasing blocks in the past and getting out of position. We've seen plenty of that. But, man, this guy is putting up Kareem numbers right now, and I'm not trying to, match him to Kareem. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point about Jimmy's overall impact when he came in. Yes, they have seen the playoffs now. They have a general idea of what it takes to get there. I think that's kind of the leftover from Butler that is a good leftover from him. I think they saw also, like you said, kind of the business of the sport and kind of how it works out. You're right in the sense that we probably would have had to choose between Wiggins or Levine. That's a good point you brought up. We probably wouldn't have kept them both. There's probably a way we could have. I'm sure Flip had something, but more than likely we would have had to choose either one. Hindsight is 20/20, as they always say. Another good point you made was Okogie. Yeah, he was drafted last year. Thibs did draft him. I thought that Rubio would have been the greatest captain, I guess, to go forward with the young kids. Maybe with a couple other parts. Obviously a much different one. I think he got a little complacent while he was here. That little trip to Utah seemed to energize him. But, yeah, like you said, he has kind of come back to the pack a little bit this season. But I thought the way he ran the floor, looked to facilitate offense, was good with his vision. He could see guys and get some cheap baskets that way. Defensively, of course, he wasn't the greatest player. I think his overall biggest impact was ticket sales. He really connected, it seemed, with the community to the team.
Yeah.
And now there doesn't seem to be that sort of connection yet. I think Okogie could be that if given the time. So I really think a guy like Covington is a nice piece, but he doesn't really have the spark that you're going to need as far as exciting the fans yet anyway. We'll see what happens when he comes back. I really like him. I thought Sarge was another good piece. So I guess if you put it all together, I wouldn't say we're better than we were roster-wise. I'm not going to say we're worse. I think we're about the same, just with a different look. I think the real thing going forward is going to be, what do we do come trade deadline, and what's the new approach as far as the draft and how we see other players. We lost the other kid that we drafted with the broken foot. He had one broken foot, and then that got healed, and he broke his other foot. So, he was a good big that we thought would come in and take some minutes, but he moved on with Jimmy to Philadelphia. So, yeah, it's a lot of looking back and saying, well, what could have been or what should have been. Going forward, I feel like, if you can get this team, and I've said this since we started talking about the Wolves, is if you can get them to play defense, you've got a much better shot at making and sustaining some sort of winning thing here. But I'm not sure, moving on to possible coaching choices. I'm not sure Hoiberg really brings that either in a coaching sense. And to really be honest, looking around the NBA, I don't really see a lot of defensive-minded things happening. So that means you get to get into a scoring arms race. And what I liked about the Dunn, Levine, Wiggins, Cat mix, through all these years, it seems to be that squad gave the Golden State Warriors the hardest time. They would go down there and they would just play and outscore them. And I think with a couple of years more experience, maybe you could have had something there that could contend. Now, the other teams in the league, obviously, they didn't perform as well. But if you could perform against Golden State and build them to beat Golden State, which is what I thought Flip was trying to do, by the time these guys get to the point where they can would have been able to challenge Golden State. Now it looks like Golden State will be coming back to the pack a little bit. So I guess you just got to kind of take a new look and a new approach of what the future is going to hold and who you're going to have to beat in the future. So I think all in all, it's probably sort of a wash, but in the end, you got to have more than a wash. I mean, a wash for us is back in the lottery, and that can't be.
Yeah. And I agree for talent, but I guess I'm saying how it relates to this before he got here and how it relates to nowadays NBA. I think we got better players. And I was actually speaking of Chris Dunn. Chris Dunn, I believe, was drafted by Thibs and had a year and they got traded. That's who I was talking about.
Yeah, that's correct. That is correct.
So, but I totally agree with you as far as overall. And in my opinion, I've never thought, and people on the surface could think this is an ignorant statement, and I understand it. But when you dig a little deeper, you start to kind of know what I mean. Like with a young team anyway, I can see Houston building a team to beat Golden State. I can see that because their guys are in their prime and they got to go now. This is a now. That's not the case here. So I guess maybe just to add a little perspective, but I never wanted them to go out of their way to build a team to beat Golden State because I thought that, first of all, no one's going to beat Golden State. So therefore, if you build a team to not the actual parts, like you got to go get this, you got to go get that, because it's the way Golden State was built had a couple of different things and a couple of lucky things that seemed bad at the start, like Curry's ankle injuries. The reason why Curry's ankle injuries early looked bad because obvious. Well, shit, man, he's young now. What's he going to look like in 10 years or 5 years or whatever? But that enabled him to contain his game, unfortunately for him. And the contract was much smaller than it would have been his first long contract. So that actually allowed them to acquire other players and then obviously, to have Thompson the next year in the draft and then to go get Draymond in the draft, later in the draft. That was huge too. But they also brought in Iguodala, who was a franchise player at Philly, making huge money. Lee barely saw the floor, but he was making franchise money with the Knicks that signed him at that time. So it was kind of a blend of trades, the actual, building your team from within, and they got better defensively. Iguodala and Draymond, for me, was what changed that team. And obviously when they got Durant, a lot of the reason why they got Durant is because Draymond his first deal wasn't huge either, because it's a points things too. You don't get money off of how much you mean to a team per se. That's just not how it works. It's mostly stats. Now, keeping them around, they'll keep them around probably because of that. But the glue, especially this year, he's not as effective as he's been. We'll see if that changes. But that allowed them to get Durant with the money situation. I think they're going to break up anyway. But you did make a good point with Flip and even Sam Mitchell. That last 2 months he had or whatever. We did beat. You're right. You're totally right, man. We did beat. We did beat them. and we played them tough in general. I believe we beat them last year too, and we were one of the only teams that beat them in that year in Golden State. I can't remember. Maybe that was only 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Either way, it is what it is. It's done. It's over. We'll see. We'll pick up the pieces from here, and we can't really go too crazy with the talk of coaching, because it's still mid-season. But I'll bring this to the conversation a little bit here. If this had something to do with ticket renewal, well, if you hired Cheryl Reeves, the first woman coach ever, you can't tell me that, because the Lynx, although the tickets are cheaper for Lynx games, although right now they may not be, but once you get closer to the court is what I'm saying, not just to get in the door or college night. And that's not ripping, by the way, the Lynx, okay? It is what it is. But they draw a crowd. They really do. I mean, the lower bowls 100% packed for every damn game for the Lynx. Period. For good reason. For good reason, obviously. And if you're worried about ticket sales, that would be a way to do it. You can't tell me that some of those. Now, of course, some of them, Timberwolves fans, Lynx fans, a lot of people just have the tickets and they go to all of them because they love basketball, including the Gophers, which we're going to talk in a little bit here. But to me, if you're worried about ticket sales and you want an experienced coach who's coached in, he played in the WNBA, played or was a coach there, and then has been with San Antonio, Pop talks her up. Well, if you want a boost, if you want that boost, which I heard a lot of talk radio people talking, about, that would be one of the best boosts you could get if you're worried about ticket sales. That's not to sit there and rip Cheryl Reeve and say, oh, she's just a ticket sales, coach, because from all the reports and what everybody talks, including Pop, she's the real deal, it sounds like. That's what it sounds like. You can never tell all the way with assistants, obviously, because it's not like in football where you have a defensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator. You can see their work. You don't know what that person does to the game plan. But Pop's not the one to just throw out, compliments either, and not even to his own players. So that's just food for thought. Chauncey Billups is another guy that's been talked about for, more an executive president, in charge of player operations. That's one that Flip tried to get here, I think 3 years ago or whatever it was. He tried to do that, so that might be something interesting. But, yeah, I'm not just head over heels for Fred Hoiberg. And to be honest with you, let's say Patino had left, I'd be all on board for Fred Hoiberg in college. He's proven that he's a very solid coach. I'm not saying like the roster was just full of talent with Chicago, and we know that they've had issues, in their executive stuff too. So I can't sit there and judge him too much on that. But that's the thing, I can't judge him too much on that. You know what I mean? But Towns, dude. Towns lately, we're seeing 5 and 6 blocks, and we're seeing assists with that. I love what I've seen out of Towns in the last, chunk of games. The consistency on defense, the guy's really turning the corner there, man.
I think he is. I think he's really starting to kind of see the sort of impact player that he could be. He's quick. He's big. He's not, your old school center Patrick Ewing type where you get down back to the basket. He's much more fluid than that, and he can be a nightmare defensively if he continues to get on to get blocks and to disrupt shooting angles and to continue to be active and move down low in the post, as well as offensively being able to range the floor, going from three-point shots to down by the basket and finishing with authority. So I really think that he's maybe starting to see what his potential is as far as being an NBA post player in the new age. Quickly, just going back, I would be completely on board with Reeves as a coach. I think that would be a great decision, not only for ticket sales, but just for kind of the way the NBA is going, and maybe add a different dynamic as far as the locker room and players go. My other, Billups, I'm about as lukewarm on that as I am on Hoiberg. I just don't know about his experience in the coaching angle. Maybe in the front office I could see that, or him working under somebody for a couple of years first. I thought a great idea also would help ticket sales as well. You can bounce this off. You see what you think about it, because I'm iffy on if it would be a good idea theoretically or a bad idea. But what about Rick Pitino? So you'd have both the Pitinos here. I know he just signed a contract in Greece. I'm not sure if it would be a one-year deal down there in Greece where he signed, but I think he'd be open to that opportunity to come up and coach the Timberwolves. And maybe his last trip through the NBA wasn't that great, but that was a very long time ago, and I know he's getting older. But, I think that could be a choice too. But, I'm going to go ahead and move Reeves to the top of my list. I really think that would be a good thing for ticket sales. I think she's a heck of a coach. She's won championships here. As far as her pedigree, it's spotless. I think that now that Lindsay's moved on to the Gophers, that would be a pretty natural rise for Reeves to go and give it a shot coaching the Timberwolves. I think the whole town would be behind her. And I think you'd fill the place up just for the heck of it. So I think that Reeves would be I think she's my top choice, actually, to come and fill that spot. We'll see how Saunders does. I mean, he might hold on to the job. But also, I thought, Wiggins, let's talk a little bit about Andrew. He's also seemed to come alive a little bit. He doesn't have that napping look in his eye anymore. And he could also be a defensive beast. And, he was at Kansas, which made him the first pick in the draft. Now, if you look at these two players, they're both capable of being first-team all-defensive players. What is it going to take to get them to the point where they can see that, and how that would help their game as well as the team and their pocketbooks? If they both just decided to be defensive monsters, it would be a great situation to have here for the Timberwolves.
Well, like you mentioned, I really think you mentioned a little bit ago, maybe it was last episode of that, when we talked a little bit of basketball late in the Vikings podcast. But I think the invention of the game Fortnite has really taken away some of this this focus here. And we can maybe Fortnite, we should sue Fortnite. Thibs should sue Fortnite and say, hey, what the hell is going on? You got my freaking boys playing this shit all night, all day. Like, what the hell is going on? I don't know, man. I don't get it. It's as if Andrew needs to play Cleveland, Toronto, or James Harden. It's like when he's matched up against an elite player, he'll match him. Sometimes he outplays him. We've seen him outplay, guys, and it's about that. Maybe he was just one of those guys coming up as a youth, and especially in college as well. And to an extent in the pros, because the scoring came fairly easy to him without an outside jump shot at the start anyway. He's improved now, but maybe it's just he's just used to just going out there, and I have length, and I'm this athlete, I'll just get it done. And he's just not used to going balls to the walls on both sides, and he just never had coaches bugging him about it. I don't know. I can't. To me, for the flip side of that, or not the flip side, but for Cat, to me it was really the first couple of years was about positioning. And you can even see when Garnett was either on the court with him or yelling from the sidelines, he was a better defender. He's in a lot better places. When KG left, and then it was just him, and then, Thibodeau, of course, but, to me, he's just in the wrong position, and you go chase guys out on the three-point line and leave a center down low. He just does things where you're like, dude, what are you doing? Now's not the time to go for a block. Just put up your hands. To me, it kind of scared me more than Wiggins defensively, because it seemed like he didn't know where he was supposed to be. And that's what used to get me. I'm just like, dude, what are you doing on that play? Can you explain it? And then the whole, getting back up on the court, that's part of defense. If we're going to call rebounds defense, which a lot of people do, a defensive rebound is defense, I always say, okay, it is, but it's secondary defense. It's not before the shot goes up, it's after, which is important, no doubt about it. Because people used to say that about Love. Well, I mean, he leads the league or is third in, rebounds, so that's defense. A rebound is defense, sure, dude, but getting down the court to actually set up for defense is just as important. If you're going to call a rebound important too. And sometimes, I just saw it last night, sometimes you're just like, dude, yell at the ref at the appropriate time. Yell while you're running. Take it out on the ref while running. Whatever you got to do, just get down and cover the big man because he just had an easy dunk. But I do think we're going to see more of the game plan like we used to see when Wiggins and Towns was the man. And that's where I'm right there with you with Rubio as far as getting in the offense, pushing the ball. He can push it, and maybe Thibs, didn't want it as much. Rubio pushed it so much more, and just the setup. You're right. He's not necessarily a traditional guard. I do like Teague's game. Don't get me wrong, but I hear you with these two parts as your stars, especially offensively. I do like the way Rubio played with them, no doubt about it, no doubt about it. And he did seem kind of like a different player after that injury defensively. His first year and a half, that guy was just all over defensively. But anyway, we're going to see how this goes. Obviously, I do think we'll have some new sets. I think we'll have some new looks, no doubt about it. I mean, just pick and roll with Towns does seem like a missing link. You got Wiggins that can get to the rack. You got Teague that can get to the rack. You got Rose that can get to the rack. You may want to run that through Towns and maybe let him either roll to the basket or be open for the jumper. I mean, Cassell and Garnett pick and roll was really tough to stop that first year. So we'll see. Is there anything Timberwolves related that we want to cover here that you want to get out of before we get to that huge win at Wisconsin and Todd Gophers on the first edition of Living in Loserville, the Minnesota Basketball Podcast?
You brought up the point about the pick and roll, and I couldn't agree more. I feel like that's where, here's some more spilled milk, is that's Rubio is a genius, probably one of the best in the world at pick and roll. And I think that's what was envisioned by Flip. He does things in the pick and roll like make you think of Pete Maravich and players like that, just once in a lifetime thing. Now you see that in Utah a little bit, but of course his parts are different. And Gobert is not Towns, and that's Wiggins is another guy whose jump shot is a little bit deficient, needs to get to the rack. So I feel like facilitating that pick and roll is Rubio's strength, and it's sad to see that he won't be out here to let that show, although we could trade back for him, but I don't see that happening. But I wish, obviously that's me, wishful thinking. But moving on to the Gophers, it was an interesting week because they had the break, and now they're coming back, and they had the three opponents that weren't really much, ending with St. Mary's. They beat 71-53. And I thought, that, like I said, it was a bit of a jog, and everybody expected them to come out and win that game. And they did. Everybody seemed to play well. And then they moved on to Wisconsin, and we'll get back to talking about that. I think that the team, that win against Nebraska, looking back before Christmas, I think that really had a big effect on the squad and kind of gelled them together as a team and let them know what they were capable of. And, they really played their hearts out on that team. McBrayer went through his thing, and he was just facing it at the time, and he came out and played well. But Coffey really stepped up, and since that game, you've really seen Coffey just kind of be the player that we thought we were going to have now. Of course, he's been injured the last couple of years, and we haven't got to see a lot of him. But now looking at him, he seems to be one of the top players in the Big Ten, and let's hope that continues. I know he put up 21 points at Wisconsin. He needs to be that team leader. I know he's not a senior yet, but he needs to be the leader of that team, and will them to win games in the Big Ten, and I thought he did that against Wisconsin pretty well.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, man. He really did, and you look at, we've had this that was our third Big Ten game, so we're 2-1 now, and you look at that Nebraska game and you look at this game, he definitely put an imprint on that, man. I mean, yes, I agree, and he's the point guard, but doesn't mean you can't push it and be the focal point as well. And by the way, this is the first time the Gophers won in Madison for football and basketball in the same season since 1973. Wow. There was a moment during that game, probably an hour into it, I don't know, somewhere in the second quarter, we were up 25-11 on rebounds. And we know that they offensive rebound. That's something they're really big at. The way they started that game, well, I shouldn't say exactly started it, because it really did start out as just a grinded-out defensive-type game, little mini 6-0 run from Wisconsin, 5-0 run back. It's like 7-6, 8 minutes into the damn game. The big thing was Murphy, the foul problems, and foul problems in general. I mean, that's another thing. With Curry back, with that depth, that big man now, that helped us a lot. And did he have like the greatest game? No, but he was solid, and we needed him because of the foul problems. We really did. But, after that slow start, next thing you know, we're on a run. I think it was 11-0, up 13-6 or something like that. 9 minutes left of the second, and it was defensively, which they haven't been great defensively this year. Not as good as I thought they'd be. They played great defensively pretty much the whole game. I will say Wisconsin, they were doing a good job double teaming the bigs and being aggressive at our bigs, obviously, to draw the fouls. Some of the foul calls were, iffy, obviously. You're on the road. It is what it is. But also Wisconsin blocking shot. But, yeah, you're right. Coffey was doing a little everything. He had a 15-3 run himself, up 29-14. Arturo got in the foul problems really quick, then came back in the game, got in foul problems more. That Brock, Stoll, he hit 2 big threes and played some. He played some nice minutes off the bench. I was a nice little surprise. Obviously, we knew there was going to be a run. That Revers came off the bench for them, a big man. He played really well. He had like 10 points in a very short amount of time. They cut it down to 8, cut it down to 6. Then it was 4, and I think they got it all the way to 2. It was 49-44 with 3, and then down by 2 minutes left. And then Coffey, he actually did like a pass shoot where he was going to pass and said, well, I got to shoot because the dude's not looking at me, hit it. And then McBrayer, with that defense, with the steal and back-to-back breakaway, buckets, one for a nice dunk, spread it up to 55-47. And I really, really, really liked the way they closed out that game, even though, they knew the home team was going to make a run. So still not ranked. We're sitting at 12-2, and that's okay. Like I said, it is what it is. I did look at the bottom part there, and we weren't in the I don't think we were in the votes to get into the top 25 receiving votes. That may have hurt us. But them losing to Western Michigan may have hurt us too, because people are like, well, yeah, they just lost 2 though, so maybe that just isn't a big deal or whatever as much to get us in there. But I did see some teams that are in there, and I saw their losses, and I thought, okay, that's kind of fair, that'll work. But Maryland's next, and Maryland on the surface is not the squad we've been used to over the last, say, 3-4 years, or at least since they've been, even back to the ACC days, obviously. But it's still a tough game. It's tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. Then, I'm telling you about the schedule here, Aaron. Then you got Rutgers at home. You got a road game at Illinois, which road Big Ten can always be a little tricky. You got a home game at Penn State. These are must wins, or I shouldn't say must wins, but we need to win 3 out of 4, I'd say, because then end of January, you're at Michigan, you're at a quality Iowa team, you're at Purdue in February, home at Wisconsin, but it's Wisconsin, at Michigan State, at Nebraska, who's a pretty good club, got to face Indiana. Back to a month later after facing them on the road, we got Michigan at home. So the second part, late January and on, it's going to be tough sledding.
Yeah, you couldn't be more right. You got to start building equity here because that last stretch is going to be not fun at all. So, yeah, this little stretch with Maryland, Rutgers, Illinois, and Penn State, if you can get 3 of the 4, at the very least, split those games. You can kind of build a little cushion. I think that's what we're going to be looking to do as far as the season goes. I'm going to go quickly back to the Wisconsin game, just give a couple of thoughts on that. Kohl Center is always tough. It makes me think that every referee in the world was born in Wisconsin because, in the past, looking at those games in the Kohl Center, it's like you touch somebody and they're calling a foul. And I think that's just kind of the way it is. Even with football, the Packers is a little touch fouls, and I don't know about the Bucs because I don't see much Bucs. I can sort of assume that it's the same way. But I thought that given having Curry back against Wisconsin, it just gives you 5 more fouls, and we were hack-a-shacking on their center, Ethan Happ, and he can't make free throws. So I thought it was a good strategy. And you add another player in there just to give you 5 more fouls. I mean, Murphy gives you 5, and then you get Oturu's 5, and maybe even Motts gets you 5, and so you get enough fouls there where you can really start to foul him and get him to the foul line, which I really think was the key to winning that game. And yeah, we just got to build some wins so that we have a little equity going into that stretch. Now, also improve as a team. I feel like if we can improve, maybe Michigan isn't so daunting. Well, that's kind of wishful thinking. Michigan's going to be tough, but the other teams in the middle there, the Ohio States and things like that, of the Big Ten. If you can kind of build a little equity, have a little cushion, feel good about yourself going into that last stretch there, I think that's going to do the team a great deal of good. And if you can get coffee with 21, 6, and 3 on a nightly basis, I mean, that's going to help you as well. Now, you probably won't get that, but if he can stay in that 15-point range and just kind of provide the sort of leadership that he needs to provide for that squad, I got a lot of confidence going forward in the Big Ten. Of course, we got to stay injury-free and no issues on the team, but I feel like it's going to be a good year, and I feel like, go ahead and play a tough team in Maryland. They're not what they were, but they're still a good team, and Maryland's always been a great program as far as basketball is concerned. So, go ahead and do that. Rutgers should be a win. Let's not take anything for granted, and Illinois the same, Penn State as well. So, yeah, it'd be great to get all 4 of those and really be strong players in the Big Ten and force other teams to worry about you coming to their building or them coming to our building.
Yeah, that would be cool. That would be great to get all 4 with that. That would be a nice confidence booster in general. And, the biggest thing I'd say is we got to be consistent with defense. We have it on the team in the coaching, of course. But also outside shooting is something that we're going to have to take a look at. With McBrayer and Coffee hitting those timely threes, as long as they're making timely threes, we should be okay. But I do see our starting lineup at times. I think you could add Curry to a minor outside shooter for a big man. He's not quite the NBA stretch 4, but he can shoot. And actually, one of his first shots, I think, this year in the last, or maybe it wasn't this year. Because he had already played a game, that's right. But in that Wisconsin game, he came out and hit a jumper, And so he can actually do that. You kind of forget about his game because, he didn't play last year, So you kind of forgot almost what he looked like. You know what I mean? Like, hey, that's Curry. I remember Curry. His hair's a little longer now. That's cool. Hey, Curry, what's going on? But we got to remember he was a very important piece of that team because What's-His-Toes was out. The guy who led the, nation in blocking. Was a very, a great player. He was always in foul problems. So that's why Curry, as a true freshman, got a ton of work, and he's a solid player, man. And I'm looking forward to him moving forward because, as we know, Murphy's gone. So, him and Ochura is a good look for next year too, and even this year when Murphy's kind of having a weird year where he'll have a dominant game and then he kind of goes to sleep, and maybe he's seeing more doubles than he has. But we're definitely going to have to do something about that. So yeah, we got some games coming up. For the Ghosts, we'll be back next week to talk, of course, Timberwolves and Gophers. Anything else you'd like to close the show with there, sir?
I just think we left out that we didn't see Isaiah Washington against Wisconsin, which I think sort of had to do with the game plan. I think Patino knew. I think he knew it was going to be a tough kind of grind-it sort of game with thought that Stahl would be a better choice there. And I really think that it was a better choice. Just maybe talk a little bit about what we see going forward with Isaiah. He's one of my favorite players on the team. And I don't want to take too much from the fact that we didn't see him against Wisconsin. We'll see how – Maryland seems to be the kind of game where he could really flourish. So I hope that we get to see him come out and play against Maryland. It'll be something to look forward to. And then, of course, we go on to Rutgers. So, yeah, I mean, they beat Nebraska. Maryland beat Nebraska by 2. And, I think we beat Nebraska by a little bit more than that. So, I think that's the biggest bump in the road. If we get over this Maryland game, I think we can take the other 3. And like I said, that puts us in great position going forward in the Big Ten.
I'm glad you brought that up because I do want to see how he responds by not playing in general, you know what I mean? And if you combine that with he played some of his best games recently, you know what I mean? Like he's had a lot of assists and stuff. So you're like, Coach, what am I doing wrong? You're not doing anything wrong. It just, it is what it is. That's a good point. And we're going to need him. We're going to need him for that spark off the bench. You never know with injuries. He may have to start. I mean, the way he closed last year was very impressive. For the most part, I almost said it straight up, but for the most part, I want to say it again. I've liked what I've seen out of his development this year. There was a couple of, I think it was in that Vancouver series where he took too many damn threes, and that's what I like about Patino. He's like, I don't want you shooting those, and I'm going to say it in the press conference. But yeah, you're right. He's a guy. Man, there's just something about this kid that when it all comes together, kid is going to be a hell of a college basketball player. I really, truly believe that. His energy, when it's on, when he can dribble into the lane, good things happen. And that's something we saw in recent games and to an extent the way he closed last year. And by the way, I don't think I ever actually commented on the double Patino look. I'll take it. I'll take it. I don't know because he doesn't have a great reputation right now, as he did 2 years ago, had we brought him in then. Right now, I don't know if but I do think it's still a ticket seller for sure because, there's enough people out there, that know college basketball and college sports, football and basketball, the main ones, and how that, the under the table, just the way that goes. A lot of people will be like, yeah, tell me something. He just got busted. That's all. That's all it is. Everybody else is doing it. So a lot of people think that anyway. So I do think that would be big, and it would keep Patino off Patino Jr., keep him, get him away from the sidelines because sometimes he's like putting in the play, and it's like, hey, Dad, can I coach here? Do you want to run the huddle or no? But he does help. I remember that NIT run. He was in his first season. He was supporting his son. I'll just put it that way. But that is kind of funny, but interesting. I kind of like it. I don't know if I like it for the future altogether, though. I don't know if I like that. But I bet you we play defense better under him. I really bet that because that's one thing. That dude will punch you to play better. You think Thibs is an asshole? I mean, Patino's on a different level, way different level, and he's connected, if you know what I mean. So no, just kidding. But that's a good point, man. Washington, I like what I see out of him lately. Beyond a couple of games where he took too many threes. And obviously they're going to leave him there, much like they did Rubio, especially when when you get into big games, that they're going to leave him out there. So he's going to have to take some of them. But I'd say that him and just the outside shooting problem, I think, may come up in big games, and that's where we're going to need, like I mentioned, McBrayer and Coffey to really hit a couple of those big ones, no doubt about it. But I think that about wraps it up, unless you got another point or two or anything like that.
No, I think that was a good wrap for the show, man. I think quickly on Washington, we're going to need solid point guard play if we make the tournament. And I feel like if we progress, if Washington could progress throughout the season and get a grip on what is asked of him this year for this team, which I think is pushing the ball, like you said, dribbling, getting in the lane and dishing out. I think those are gifts that are rare nowadays in point guards. And maybe we need some scoring from them, but not as much as we need, the speed and the defense and the passing. And if he can stay kind of in that realm and take a shot when it's given to him, whether that's a 3 or a 2, and just learn kind of, pull back a little bit and watch the floor and use his vision, it's going to be perfect for going forward in the tournament. And he's got all season now to keep an eye on him and to see if that progresses. And I hope it does. If it does, we're a tough out in the tournament, man. I mean, we're young, quick. We got shooters like Kelcher. And a good point guard like that will allow Coffey to go to the 2 and maybe flirt with the 3 a little bit, depending on your matchups. It's a tough out in the tournament if everybody stays healthy. So, I really want this kid to come through and to kind of hit his potential maybe this year. It gives us a really strong team come March.
Definitely. And just looking at that starting lineup, the length is impressive, man. We got some long, lanky dudes that can really get it done. I know we're starting 2 freshmen, but I like this starting lineup. I really do. I think it'll work. Like I said, I mean, the 3-point shooting we'll see, but it's not like the NBA. And it is kind of strange to talk about it like that, because remember, college was the league that had teams that were built off 3-point shooting. That's what they recruited to that. They usually lost come March because of that. Literally teams completely had 3-pointers. That's all they did. Shoot a bunch and live and die by it and all that. Even great teams, even some great Duke teams did that and do that. Not this year, but, overall they've had that in the past. But I'm not saying we need all these shooters, but that's, I guess, my only worry. But, man, the length on this starting lineup, it's really starting to look like a, dare I say, Patino lineup based off what his dad did in college. All right, well, that wraps up the first Living in Loserville podcast. Of course, that, covers the Minnesota Timberwolves and Gophers, whether it's news like we had today with Thibs being fired. Mostly it'll be recap from games and themes that we're starting to see, whether it's positive or negative, and then kind of previewing what's to come. And I'm sure we'll talk, some more trade stuff once this heats up. I think they're going to move some. I really like Gibson this year. I liked him last year too, and I like how he's expanded his outside game, much like Georgie Dang. Dang's got to go, unfortunately, because of the money, and Teague might be on the block. He has a $19 million player option, which could get interesting when trading him. But Teague is, a lot of people are pointing to Teague. The only thing is, when we make these trades, do want some value. You know what I mean? I don't want to just dump stuff. I want some value, and people have to remember, this is not like the NFL. There's not 7 rounds. There's not free agency after 7 rounds. There is free agents. They get picked up. I'm not saying that. But it's not like 7 rounds worth of players and then another layer where you can actually find people and develop them. this is a really quick. I mean, yeah, you can look at San Antonio and see what they've done deep in the draft. But how many other people have done good deep in the draft? Not that we'll be deep in the draft this year. I should preference that. But I just want to – what are we getting for Gibson? Now, is he going to go and Sarick's coming anyway? Sure, I get that. And I think that's where we need to go probably. But I do like the way Gibson's played, and I like how you can just give him the ball in certain spots. If it's one-on-one, it's a good chance he's going to score, especially in the post. He's got a nose for the bucket. But you know what? I gotta stop. Because this is how we do it. We start talking buckets, we start talking this, and pretty soon it's a 2.5-hour show. But anyway, thanks for joining us for the first Living in Loserville podcast, and it's fitting. It is fitting. We're positive people, but we're realistic too. We are living in Loserville. Like it or not, most people hate it. Anyway, signing off. Enjoy the game tonight, football-wise, college football-wise. Bama in Clemson. We are out of here. Peace.
Peace.
Once you become the world champion, I believe that you feel you have the upper hand. So now when